Alright, welcome back. In this particular video, we're going to be looking at the character and paragraph panels, and so we'll be continuing to work with text. So let's get started. Alright, so in the previous exercise, we were kind of working around with playing with the different text tools from the toolbar, and so I want to divert our attention for a minute over to the panel side of the screen and take a look and peer around at the options for working with type from there. So right now, if you're probably working in the standard workspace, you're not going to see any type option panels open, and that's okay. We just need to open them up one by one. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually switch panel options workflow-wise up here at the top. We can do it automatically by clicking on where it says Essentials, and we can change it over to Typography. And we pull up typography, and this will pull up all the different panels related to working with text inside of Illustrator conveniently for us. If you don't see it right there on the top of your screen like that, you can also access it from the window menu at the top. And there's a pull down inside there for workspaces. And so there's workspace, and there we can get to it from there as well. All right. And so let's take a look at some of these panels. I want to look specifically at the character and the paragraph panel. So the character panel is this first basic one right here, and this contains all the basic options for editing your text, enhancing it, changing type, size, scale, positioning, all of that. And so we're going to look at those details now. So I'm going to get my type box for language repositioned on screen here, because that's our main title. It's supposed to be positioned right here inside this part of the mouth. So we're going to get that rigged. So first off, I'm going to have it selected. And we're going to work with first attribute of working with text, which is just changing its color, which is pretty easy. So select the text you want to change the color of, and then go to your top option bar and change the fill to the color you want. So I'm going to change mine to, let's say, orange, and I'm going to move my text over. Now I can't see it, and that's basically because it's buried in my layer stack. So I'm going to double click on my layer panel over here on the lower right, and I'm going to locate that text, which is inside this computer area, which is not right. So I'm going to take that and probably move it out to its own layer stack as well. We need a new layer for text. I'm just going to call one of these, rename it text. And now we're going to take that layer, type layer here, and we're going to drag that into our text main layer. There we go. Now we got it in the right place, but the ordering is still not good because it still shows below the mouth, and we need it above it. So we're going to drag this whole layer up above the mouth layer. There we go. All right. So we got that changed. Now what we need to do is we're going to work with the character panel to actually blow this thing up and make it big enough to fit in the mouth and play around with the stylization of it. So let's look at the character panel for that. You'll notice in the character panel there are a few options instantly. Number one, they give you instant access to the touch type tool. If you recall from our last video, the touch type tool allows you to instantly change the scaling of an individual letter character within a string of characters or text on screen you have. So that's just for convenience. They also, below that, have the drop-down for all of the different types of fonts that are installed and available through Adobe Illustrator. So if we click on this drop-down, you will see immediately the very extensive list of character options available to you that are already installed. Now often, it also reads characters and fonts available on your computer if they are compatible with the system. So you'll be able to find them and look at them inside here. Very cool deal. If you have your own copy of Illustrator, you can also use something called the Type Kit, which allows you to add fonts from online from Adobe source services that you can use anytime, anywhere. So that's a pretty cool feature to have access to if you have your own version of it. All right. So we can change type first by just changing font options from this menu. And so you can see the name of the typeface and also example text of each one. So we can switch anywhere from what we're working on to something completely different. And each one has its own mood and way of presenting itself. That's something to keep in mind with typography. It is often mood-driven and purpose-driven. So when you're selecting text for your own design, be purposeful. Not all types of text are appropriate for all situations or for all types of communication. So the question is, which one communicates your idea the clearest? So I'm going to pick this version, Bank Gothic. I'm going to use, let's see, you can also change something here if your typeface has a version of it available, a type style. So mine has light or medium available. And so I'm just going to change it to medium real quick. And then we can change that up. Now many professional typefaces will often have a lot of different type styles available, especially if they're sort of common use fonts, common styled fonts. But the professional ones generally are designed with multiple formats available. Using those styles is a quick way to establish hierarchy in your text design, just as kind of a point there, that you can use different types of type styles for one typeface and be able to establish hierarchy instantly. And so that can all be accessed from here. Alright, so we've established that. Now we're going to look at the bottom half of the panel for character. Underneath that, you also have tools for controlling scale of type, which is based on a point value. Standard scale for any typeface in here starts at 12, and then you can just instantly up it. You can also use the drag down here for selecting standard point size values to get your font size boosted. So I'm going to make mine, again, we're going to grow this thing out to where it fits inside of the mouth pretty well. And as you notice, as I scale up, it's actually scaling from the left towards the right. So I'm trying to use that strategically while I engage the text here. So there we go. Nice equal growth done. All right, let me show you some of these other options. Some of these are very specific, like this one right here. It shows the A one on top of the other. That's called leading. So that allows you to adjust if you have multiple layers of text on screen. It gives you the ability to shift their baseline between them or spacing between them, like when working with double spacing inside of something like Microsoft Word. Similarly, you can use that to make the adjustment. They also have other options down here like kerning or tracking for changing letter, like kerning for instance will allow you to change the distancing between individual letter forms, while tracking allows you to change the distance between multiple letter forms or multiple words. So either of those are very specific for typographic purposes and enhancement, but again they may not be something you necessarily visit in your design. They do come in handy when trying to reposition text that's in a big paragraph form that you need to fit a certain way. So that's working with the basic parts of the character box. Now there are expanded options you're not seeing that we can turn on. So from the character panel, go straight over to the right of that tab and you should see another little button over here on the far right of that tab, those tabs. We're going to click on that and we're going to change this to have the show options available. And so when you turn on show options, it then expands the menu to give you all of these other type options. So you can change the vertical scale of your text with your text is selected, but you can change scaling of your text either vertically or horizontally. You can also change, you can also shift the baseline for individual letters. You can also rotate all of your text. So you can rotate your letters on their side or however. Now one will affect, if you affect the whole thing, all of them get affected together and so they all equally rotate, which means that they all create more space between each other as well. So again, these are features that you may or may not use when designing in your work, but they may come in handy for tweaking specifically, and that's where looking at these particular options is the most important for you. Alright, so that takes care of the character panel. Now the other one that I want to show you is the paragraph panel, and we need some paragraph text to work with, right? Now, if you remember from earlier, we had designed some placeholder text that we use, so we're going to go ahead and pull that back forward and turn my placeholder text back on, and we're just going to pull up one of the paragraphs we have down here. All right, so the character panel comes in handy whenever you have a lot of this sort of paragraph text that you're working with. So let me show you why that matters. Why the paragraph panel can be helpful in that sense. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so we can look at this panel a little more correctly. And I'm going to just actually take it off this drawing in the background too. We're going to turn off framework for now. There we go. So we have this chunk of text here that fits inside our text box. A couple things to notice. The text, though it does fit well in here, it doesn't fit very well along the edges. This edge over here that's kind of rough and rounded, whenever you see that in text, that's called the rag. And often the rag is a little rough and a little bumpy, and it doesn't quite read very effectively, especially if you have lots of little hyphens or dashes that continue a word from one line down to the next. Often that creates a headache or a bump in reading through text that's not very helpful for anyone. So there are some ways that we can get rid of those kinds of problems on screen just from using the paragraph panel. So let's start with this paragraph. We're going to select it. And under the paragraph panel, you'll notice that there are lots of options here for changing your justification of your text across the top. So you've got your basics of left, center, right, and then you have your full justifications. These are actually very handy. Full Justify can clean up things a little bit more quickly if your text is fairly well brought together and doesn't have a lot of spacing around it. This can create a lot of really good use of space to help fill it out more effectively. Instead of just trying to have it all kind of clustered word to word, it adds a little bit of spacing and a little bit more kerning in between the words or tracking between the words to be able to accommodate this pushing out of the words to the edges. So we've got that set up for that part, so you can play around with those. I recommend, if you're going to do it, to probably use the Justify with like a left hanging line right here. It's a good sort of a good note here when talking typography. Things you don't want to end up with are like an orphan word. A single word on the last line is not usually a good idea. You try to do everything you can to make sure that doesn't happen, to where it's more like a few words, or there's no single line of shorthand text left behind. No leftover letters, none of that. So we got that rigged, and that looks pretty good now. It's filled out the box. Let's go ahead and turn off hyphenation. So I'm going to go to paragraph and go to my little option box, and we're going to select hyphenation and actually hit cancel. And down here in the bottom of the paragraph box, you'll notice a checkbox for hyphenate. We're just going to uncheck it. And when we do that, then it makes it to where it doesn't continue or break words at the end of each line of text. Again, this increases readability and engagement whenever someone's looking over your piece. The more hyphenation you have, the more annoying it gets with someone whenever they're trying to read through something. So try to avoid hyphenating words if you can. It works when it's artistic and it's meant for something you're not necessarily going to read maybe, but when using it in a place where you need to read it, try to keep that as minimalized or out of the design as much as possible. All right. Now those are the basic things that you can do with working inside the paragraph panel. Again, a very useful panel to play around with, especially for working with your paragraph text on screen. So these can help very quickly clean up your text and make it more readable, more legible for the people you're going to be working with. All right. The last thing I just want to make you aware of when looking at your different type options beyond the panels is that if you notice across the top of the screen, you do have a collection of type-oriented controls based on whatever type you have selected on screen. So you can access the character options from up here very quickly. You can also access the font, the style, the scale, and you can also access your paragraph options up here. So every one of those are available to you across the top. They also have some other options up here. If you look, there's also things like text warping. where you can adjust the shaping of your text with an envelope filter that they have designed. Like this is kind of what's also appears like word art. If you're familiar with Microsoft Word's word art function, you can do something much the same with your own text. So if you want to apply like a transformation to it or even modify it on screen, these are the tools you can use to do that. And so they have lots of those in here. Now 90% of these I would say are probably not worth your time or your effort to engage with, but it doesn't hurt. So that's your basic text warp. You can also make warps with a mesh over the top of your text like this, where it makes a grid, and that allows you to click and drag on these anchor points when I grab an anchor point. There we go, direct select will do it. But that'll allow you to create kind of quick visual distortions out of your text as you work with it. So sometimes you can get interesting effects out of that as well. All right. Okay, so that's working with your different type-related options that you have available to you inside of Illustrator. Other ways that you can also work with your text inside here, besides doing those things, I mentioned earlier that you can also do things with your text like adjusting or creating hierarchies with your text. So if you're working with a grouping of text and you want to make adjustments for hierarchy, you may want to go back to your character panel, have a chunk of text selected, and work with the different style options you have available with that text so that you don't have to try to figure out which two typefaces can I combine to make things work together. Sometimes that gets pretty complicated. And my best recommendation is to stick with a single typeface that gives you lots of style options. Because then you can make any second or third line of text stand out from the other just by changing its style and its scale. And that's almost enough to make all the difference in the world. When you pair those two things together with your type style and your scale along with something like color, then it's very quick and very easy to make some sort of visual hierarchy out of the language and the text you have on screen. So finding ways to offset that is important when working inside your design. So again, I hope that's been helpful as far as working with character and type, or your character and your paragraph panels inside of Illustrator. Again, email if you have any questions, but feel free to check other resources out. All right, when we get back together, we'll take a look after this at extending beyond just looking at the type tools, but also learning like sort of special applications like how to create like a pattern out of text. So we'll get back together and we'll look at that next time. All right, take care.